Chapter 1. The Silent Approach. The Indomitable drifted in the cold void of space, its engines silent, its crew waiting. They had been on this mission for days, weeks even, and still no contact had been made with the Varians, the alien race they were supposed to meet. The mission was simple: establish diplomatic relations, offer help in their fight against the Pogyrators, an ancient and dangerous force threatening the galaxy. Yet, despite the urgent need, something felt wrong. Captain Lake stood in front of the large window of the command center, staring at the vast emptiness beyond. His thoughts were heavy, each one filled with uncertainty. They had come so far, crossed thousands of light years, but what awaited them could change everything. If the Varians didn't show up soon, they would have to make a decision: wait or take matters into their own hands. His first officer, Zorth, a Varian with translucent blue skin and eyes that glowed faintly, approached. "Captain, we've detected a ship on the sensors. It's heading toward us." Lake turned to face him. His heart quickened. Could this be the Varian fleet? Or something else? "Bring it up on screen," he ordered. The view screen flickered and the image of an alien warship appeared. It was massive, far larger than the Indomitable, with jagged edges that resembled teeth and a hull that shimmered unnaturally in the light of the distant stars. The vessel was unlike anything Lake had seen before. "Unknown origin," the sensor officer reported. "It's not Varian, it's something else." Lake's instincts flared. This wasn't the first time they had encountered a strange force in this region of space. The Pogyrators had been rumored to have developed new, terrifying weapons. This could be one of their advanced vessels. "Hail them," Lake ordered. The screen remained dark for a moment before a voice echoed through the room. It was harsh, electronic, and distorted. "We are the Time Eaters," the voice said. "We are the ones who control time. You are trespassing in our domain." Lake felt a chill run down his spine. Time Eaters? He had heard rumors about such beings, but they were supposed to be nothing more than legends. "What do you want?" Lake demanded, trying to maintain control of the situation. "We want your fleet," the voice replied coldly. "And we want your time." Chapter 2. The First Strike. The message from the Time Eaters lingered in the air long after the transmission ended. Lake stood frozen, processing the threat. The words, "We want your time," echoed in his mind. What did they mean? How could they take something as abstract as time? Zorth stepped forward, his face grim. "Captain, the Time Eaters are a dangerous race. We have encountered them before, but only in small numbers. We never expected them to be so bold, to come this far." Lake nodded, his mind racing. The Time Eaters were not just another enemy. They were masters of temporal manipulation, capable of warping time to their will. If they could control time itself, how could anyone stop them? "We need to act fast," Lake said. "Prepare for battle. Get us ready to engage." Zorth hesitated. "Captain, we may not be able to fight them with conventional weapons. Their power over time is beyond anything we've ever encountered." Lake's mind worked quickly. He had no choice but to risk everything. If they didn't stop the Time Eaters now, the consequences would be catastrophic. "We'll have to adapt, Zorth. We have no other option." The crew scrambled to prepare for the impending conflict. Weapons were primed, shields raised, and the Indomitable began its slow, deliberate approach toward the enemy ship. Outside, the stars shimmered eerily as time itself seemed to shift. A sudden tremor ran through the ship, as if the very fabric of reality were being stretched. "They're already manipulating time," one of the officers called out. Lake's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. This was just the beginning. Chapter 3. The battle begins. The Indomitable moved cautiously through the strange, shifting space, every moment feeling like a test of reality itself. Outside the ship, stars appeared to flicker in and out of existence, warping as though caught in some great cosmic storm. The Time Eaters weren't just manipulating the space around them, they were twisting time itself. "They've created a time distortion field," the sensor officer reported, her voice tense. "Our chronometers are fluctuating. Time here is unstable." Lake turned to Zorth, who had been unusually quiet. Can we get through it? Lake asked. Zorth's eyes were narrowed, studying the screen. It's possible, but the cost could be high. The field could tear through the hull if we don't adjust the ship's temporal stabilizers. We need to move carefully, or we might get trapped in a time loop. Lake's mind raced. He couldn't afford to hesitate now. Do what you can, he said. Prepare for any surprises. Zorth gave a short nod, and the crew sprang into action, working quickly to calibrate the ship's systems. The time distortion was an unknown enemy, but they couldn't afford to wait. Every moment spent in this strange space was a risk. The Indomitable began to drift forward slowly, and Lake's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden transmission from the Time Eaters. "You are wasting your time, humans," the voice echoed through the comms. "You cannot escape the inevitable. Time is ours to command." Lake gritted his teeth. "You're wrong," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We won't be controlled by you." Suddenly, the ship shook violently, throwing Lake off balance. His hands gripped the edge of his chair as the bridge erupted into chaos. "Shields are failing," one of the officers shouted. "We're losing integrity." The Time Eaters weren't just playing with time. They were manipulating it in real time, turning the Indomitable's own weapons against them. As the crew worked frantically to stabilize the ship, Lake knew they were running out of time. Literally. Chapter 4. Temporal Anomalies. The Indomitable's engines roared as the crew fought to keep the ship in one piece. Outside, the Time Eater vessel loomed closer, its jagged silhouette cutting through the warped space. Lake couldn't help but feel the gravity of the situation. Time was no longer their ally. It was the battlefield. "We need to disable their temporal manipulation," Zorth said, his voice tight with urgency. "If we can't, we're going to lose everything." Lake nodded grimly. Zorth was right. The Indomitable's weapons were useless against the time distortions. They had to find another way to fight back. "How do we disable their system?" Lake asked. Zorth tapped his console, bringing up a series of schematics. "There's a core located at the heart of their ship. It's the source of their time manipulation technology. If we can destroy it, we may be able to stop them." Lake studied the schematics. The core was well protected, surrounded by layers of armor and energy shields that would be nearly impossible to breach with conventional weapons. "We'll need to get close," Lake said. "Too close for comfort." Zorth's eyes narrowed, and his expression became grim. "Yes, and the closer we get, the more unstable the time distortions will become. We'll have to move quickly and carefully, or we could end up in a time loop that never ends." Lake didn't hesitate. He made his decision. "We'll do it. Get ready to board their ship." The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. The crew quickly began preparing for the mission. The stakes were high, and failure meant death. Not just for them, but for everyone who would ever exist if the Time Eaters won. Chapter 5. The Boarding Operation. The Indomitable shuddered as the crew made final preparations. Lake stood at the helm, watching as the boarding pods were readied for launch. Zorth stood beside him, his face tight with concentration. "We've calculated the trajectory, Captain," Zorth said. "But even with the temporal distortions, we'll have to make the approach without being detected." Lake nodded, his mind focused. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The crew had trained for this kind of operation, but nothing could prepare them for the chaos of fighting inside a ship that could bend time. "Launch the pods," Lake ordered. The pods shot forward, leaving the Indomitable behind as they hurtled toward the Time Eater vessel. Inside the pods, the team of soldiers was silent, each one mentally preparing for what lay ahead. As the pods neared the enemy's ship, the time distortions became stronger. The walls of the ship seemed to ripple as if they were made of liquid. "Stay sharp," Lake's voice crackled through the comms. "We don't know what we'll face on the other side." The pods slammed into the Time Eater ship's hull, the metal groaning as they made contact. The soldiers inside quickly deployed, weapons drawn, ready for anything. They moved cautiously, knowing that even a slight misstep could send them into an infinite loop of time. Chapter 6. Infiltrating the Heart. Inside the Time Eater's ship, the team moved with precision. The ship was eerily quiet, the air heavy with a strange, oppressive feeling. The walls pulsed as if alive, and the further they went, the more distorted reality seemed to become. They were walking through corridors that twisted and bent in impossible ways, spaces that shouldn't have existed. Time itself felt fractured here, each step a journey through multiple realities. Lake's heart raced. They were so close, but the risk of being caught in a time loop was ever present. "We're nearing the core," Zorth said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We'll need to plant the charges and get out before the distortions become too severe."
The team moved quickly, planting explosives at key points around the core. But as they worked, the time distortions intensified. Soldiers stumbled, caught in fleeting moments of the past, while others found themselves moving backward in time, losing precious seconds. "Hurry!" Lake shouted, his voice strained. "We're running out of time!" With the charges set, they made their way back to the boarding pods. But as they reached the exit, the core suddenly erupted in a burst of temporal energy, throwing them off balance. Reality fractured around them as time itself seemed to tear apart. Lake barely managed to catch himself as the ship began to collapse inward. "Get to the pods now," Lake commanded. The soldiers scrambled toward the pods, but not all of them made it in time. The distortions were too powerful, too chaotic. As the team retreated, Lake could only watch helplessly as the ship's core destabilized, pulling them into an endless time loop. Chapter 7: A Price to Pay. The Indomitable shook violently as the explosion from the Time Eater ship reached them. Time seemed to bend around them, but their systems held steady. "Captain, we've stabilized," Zorth reported, his voice filled with relief. "The core is gone. The time distortions are starting to subside." Lake breathed a sigh of relief, but as the ship returned to normal, he couldn't shake the feeling that their victory had come at a terrible cost. "We've lost many good people today," Lake said softly. "But we've also won. We've stopped the Time Eaters." But deep down, he knew this battle was only the beginning. If there was one thing he had learned during this mission, it was that time could be a far more dangerous enemy than any weapon. And as they moved forward, the consequences of their actions would echo through the ages. Chapter 8: The Aftermath. The Indomitable hung in the void, silent except for the hum of its engines as the crew began to regroup. The Time Eater vessel had been destroyed, but the victory was hollow. Lake stood on the bridge, looking at the remains of the enemy ship on the view screen. The twisted remnants of what had once been an imposing warship now floated in a distorted, fractured space. Time had been their greatest weapon, but it had also been their undoing. Zorth approached, his blue skin still reflecting the light of the distant stars, but his face was somber. "Captain, the damage to our ship is extensive. The time distortions have left us with more than just physical damage. We've lost personnel, and some of our systems are still unstable." Lake nodded. He had expected the losses, but it didn't make it any easier. His eyes moved to the crew members who remained. The ones who had fought so bravely, they had made it, but at a price. "We'll survive this, Zorth," he said, his voice steady. "But we need to make sure the rest of the galaxy knows what happened. The Time Eaters are out there, and we need to warn everyone." Zorth's expression hardened. "Agreed. But I fear that our victory today may have only delayed the inevitable. The Time Eaters are relentless, and they have the ability to bend time to their will. What we faced here could be just the beginning of something much larger." Lake clenched his fists. He had no illusions about the dangers they had faced. He had seen firsthand what the Time Eaters were capable of, but even in the face of uncertainty, he refused to give up. "We'll be ready for them next time," he said. "Now, let's get this ship back in shape. We have a long journey ahead of us." Chapter 9: Echoes of Time. The Indomitable limped through space, its engines straining against the damage caused by the battle with the Time Eaters. The crew worked tirelessly to repair what they could, but the ship would never be the same. The time distortions had left their mark, not just on the hull, but on the minds of the crew. Time, it seemed, was as much an enemy as any ship or weapon. As the crew continued their work, Lake couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision he had made. He had chosen to confront the Time Eaters head-on, to risk everything for the sake of survival. But what if the consequences were worse than they had imagined? What if they had unleashed something that could not be stopped? Zorth entered the bridge, his eyes reflecting the same unease Lake felt. "Captain, I've been going over the data we collected from the Time Eater ship. There's something strange. I believe they were using more than just time manipulation. They were experimenting with the fabric of reality itself." Lake turned to him, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "The core," Zorth continued. "It wasn't just a time manipulation device. It was also a weapon capable of tearing holes in the fabric of space itself. If they had succeeded in their plans, they could have created a rift that would have consumed entire systems, entire regions of space. Time would have collapsed on itself."
Lake felt a chill run down his spine. They had narrowly avoided an even worse disaster than they had imagined. "And what happens now?" Lake asked, his voice quiet. Zorth looked grim. "Now, we prepare. The Time Eaters won't stop, and I believe they've already begun their next phase. We can't afford to wait any longer." Lake stood up, a sense of resolve settling over him. He knew what had to be done. "Then we'll do what we must. We'll stop them before they can finish whatever it is they're planning. Prepare the ship. We're heading back to the core worlds." The Time Eaters might have been defeated for now, but Lake knew that their war was far from over. The galaxy was in peril, and they were the last line of defense. Chapter 10. The Gathering Storm. The Indomitable left the remains of the Time Eater ship behind as it made its way through the galaxy, heading toward the core worlds. The journey was long, and the damage to the ship was significant, but the crew pressed on. They knew that time was no longer their ally, and the longer they delayed, the greater the threat would become. As they approached the core worlds, Lake couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much larger than they had anticipated. The Time Eaters were only one part of a much more complex puzzle, and if they didn't act soon, they might find themselves facing an enemy far worse than they had ever imagined. Zorth stood beside him on the bridge, his face reflecting the same sense of urgency. "Captain, I've received reports from the outer colonies. There are signs of temporal disruptions all over the galaxy. The Time Eaters are spreading their influence." Lake's jaw tightened. The Time Eaters were growing bolder, and the galaxy was beginning to feel the effects of their actions. But they weren't just dealing with a new enemy. They were dealing with a force that could destroy everything they had fought for. "We need to warn the core worlds," Lake said. "Rally the fleet. We'll need every ship, every ally we can find." Zorth nodded. "Agreed. But Captain, we may need more than just a fleet. The Time Eaters are not a conventional enemy. We need to understand their technology, their true nature, if we're to have any hope of defeating them." Lake paused. He knew Zorth was right. They had been so focused on the immediate battle that they hadn't stopped to fully understand what they were facing. "Then we'll learn everything we can. Prepare for a full analysis of the Time Eater data. We need to know everything about them." The crew went to work, preparing for the next stage of their mission. Time was running out, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Chapter 11. The Heart of the Enemy. The Indomitable reached the core worlds, and Lake prepared to meet with the highest-ranking officials of the galaxy. The time disruptions were growing worse, and the threat of the Time Eaters was becoming an urgent matter. Lake knew that their enemies had only just begun to show their true power. They had to act quickly if they were to have any chance of stopping them. Inside the war room, Lake sat with leaders from various sectors of the galaxy. Zorth was by his side, providing crucial information about the Time Eaters. The discussions were tense, each leader aware of the looming threat. There was no room for error. The fate of the galaxy depended on the choices they made now. "We must strike first," one of the commanders said, slamming his fist on the table. "If we wait, it will be too late." Lake shook his head. "We can't just strike blindly. The Time Eaters control time itself. We need to find their weak point, and only then can we defeat them." Zorth stepped forward, his voice low but filled with authority. "The weak point lies in their manipulation of the core. If we can infiltrate their main base and destroy the heart of their operation, we can disrupt their control over time. Lake nodded. That's our goal. We'll gather an alliance of fleets and we'll hit them where it hurts. The room fell silent, each leader understanding the gravity of the situation. They were preparing for the most dangerous mission they had ever faced. The Time Eaters were more than just conquerors. They were destroyers of reality itself.
Chapter 12. The Final Confrontation. The final preparations were underway. The combined fleet of the galaxy's forces assembled in the vastness of space, ready to strike at the heart of the Time Eater stronghold. The Indomitable would lead the charge, but this time, it wouldn't be alone. The fleet was united, but the battle ahead would require more than just force. It would take every bit of courage and ingenuity they had. Lake stood on the bridge, looking out at the assembled fleet. The time distortions had begun to subside, but they were still present, lurking at the edges of their perception. "This is it, Zorth," Lake said softly. "Our final chance to end this," Zorth nodded. "We'll make it count, Captain." The fleet jumped to warp, and the battle began. Chapter 13. Into the Heart of Darkness. The Indomitable led the charge as the united fleet entered the space controlled by the Time Eaters. The distorted time fields around them were maddening, like being in a dream where every moment felt disjointed. As they approached the Time Eater stronghold, the battle began. Ships of all sizes launched waves of firepower at the enemy, but it was clear that the Time Eaters had anticipated their arrival. The sky was filled with flickering distortions as ships vanished and reappeared, moving through time as if it were mere space. The fleet struggled to maintain its formation, as even the most experienced pilots found themselves disoriented by the shifting realities. "Brace for impact," Lake shouted over the comms. His voice was steady, though his pulse raced. Time was their enemy now, and every second counted. Explosions erupted across the fleet, as Time Eater ships phased in and out of existence, striking with devastating efficiency. The Indomitable took a direct hit from a temporal missile, its shields flickering weakly before failing completely. The ship rocked, and the crew was thrown into disarray. "We need to reach their core," Zorth's voice cut through the chaos. "We can't fight them here forever. We must disable their manipulation device or risk losing everything." Lake's mind was racing as he took in the sight of the unfolding battle. The fleet was in disarray, but the Indomitable had one advantage: its proximity to the heart of the Time Eater stronghold. If they could just push through the chaos and reach the core, they could potentially neutralize the Time Eater's ability to manipulate time. "Get us closer," Lake ordered, gripping the command chair as another blast rattled the hull. The crew worked quickly, making the necessary adjustments to the ship's trajectory. The Indomitable pushed forward, cutting through the fire and chaos like a knife through water. Time seemed to stretch and snap, reality warping around them. The closer they got to the core, the more intense the time distortions became, as though the universe itself was resisting their presence. Chapter 14. The Nexus. They reached the edge of the Time Eater stronghold, a massive, twisting structure that seemed to bend time itself. It was a twisted mockery of reality, a citadel formed of the raw stuff of time, its walls flickering between moments. As they docked in the heart of the station, the crew quickly deployed, donning suits designed to withstand the distortions. Their mission was clear: destroy the core. "Stay focused," Lake said as he led the team down the darkened hallways. "One mistake, and we'll be lost in time forever." The corridor seemed to stretch infinitely before them, twisting and turning in ways that defied all logic. Time was bending around them, disorienting them with every step. The air felt thick, charged with the energy of temporal manipulation. They moved deeper into the station, the hum of the core growing louder with each passing moment. The core itself was an enormous, pulsating mass of energy, surrounded by layers of energy fields and temporal shields. As they approached, they could feel the effects of the time distortions intensifying. Some of the soldiers moved too quickly, only to find themselves suddenly appearing several seconds behind, forced to fight through the disorienting time fluctuations. "We don't have much time," Zor shouted, already working on the devices they had brought to disable the shields. But as the team worked, something unexpected happened. The air crackled with energy, and the core began to hum louder, its power surging. It was reacting to their presence. "They know we're here," Lake said, his eyes widening. "Get ready for a fight." Chapter 15, The Timekeeper. Suddenly, a figure appeared before them, flickering in and out of existence. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were constantly shifting. Its face one moment a blur of energy, the next a twisted, incomprehensible mask of time itself. The Timekeeper, Lake realized. The guardian of the core. "You cannot stop us, human." The Timekeeper's voice echoed, its tone chilling and inhuman. "Time is our dominion. You will never escape." The figure raised its hand, and the fabric of reality around them tore. For a brief moment, the crew was torn from their physical bodies, experiencing the flow of time from countless perspectives at once. The sensation was maddening, as they were forced to see their own past, present, and future all at once. Lake struggled to focus, pulling himself back into the present. "We can't let it distract us," he shouted to his crew. "Keep pushing." The Timekeeper's form flickered and phased, vanishing only to reappear behind them. It was playing with them, using its control over time to make them question reality. Lake knew that they could not afford to waste time. They had one goal, the core. He drew his weapon and fired, the shot colliding with the Timekeeper's form. But it passed through the entity as though it were made of liquid light. The Timekeeper's laughter echoed in their minds, filling them with dread. "Time cannot be destroyed," the Timekeeper said, its voice now a whisper in their minds. "You cannot kill what is eternal." Lake gritted his teeth, refusing to give in. They had to end this, no matter the cost. He turned to Zorth, who was still working on the disabling devices. "Zorth now!" Zorth looked up, his face pale with exertion. "I'm almost there, just a little longer." But before they could finish, the Timekeeper launched another attack. The ground beneath them cracked and buckled, and temporal energy surged outward, displacing everything. They were flung backward, crashing into the walls as time itself seemed to collapse inward. Lake struggled to stand, but the world around him was spiraling. The crew was disoriented, struggling against the pull of the time distortions. "We're losing it," one of the soldiers shouted. "We need to get to the core now, or we're done." Lake's vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt time stretch endlessly. But he forced himself to focus, to push through the distortion. "Zorth, do it now." With a final effort, Zorth slammed his hands onto the device, and the room was filled with a blinding flash. The core destabilized, and the time distortions began to crack apart. The Timekeeper screamed, its form warping as the energy of the core was severed. In one final explosive burst, the Timekeeper vanished, and the structure around them began to collapse. The Indomitable had done it. The core was destroyed. But at what cost? Chapter 16, A New Beginning. As the Indomitable pulled away from the crumbling Time Eater station, Lake couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had come at an immense cost. The battle had been won, but the war against time itself was far from over. The crew had survived, but their journey was far from finished. The galaxy was in a fragile state, its future uncertain. The Time Eaters had been defeated, but there were others. Other threats that lurked in the darkness of space, waiting to take advantage of the chaos. The universe had changed, and the crew of the Indomitable would continue to fight, to protect what they had left. Lake stood at the bridge window, looking out at the vastness of space. The stars were distant, cold, but in that silence he found a moment of peace. "We did it," Zorth said from behind him, his voice quiet but resolute. "But we must remain vigilant. The galaxy still needs us." Lake turned to him, nodding. "We'll always be ready. Whatever comes next." The journey of the Indomitable was far from over. The crew had proven that they could face the unimaginable, but they knew that the future would always hold new challenges. And as long as they had each other, they would face them together. The battle may have ended, but the story of their fight, for survival, for the galaxy, for time itself, was just beginning. Chapter 17, The Shifting Horizon. The Indomitable drifted through space, leaving the shattered remnants of the Time Eater stronghold behind. The ship had been heavily damaged, but it was still functional. The crew, although battered and weary, was determined to press forward. They knew that even though they had dealt a massive blow to the Time Eaters, their work was far from done. Lake paced the bridge, his mind filled with thoughts of the future. They had won a battle, but not the war. The Time Eaters were not the only threat the galaxy faced. They had discovered hints of other, more insidious forces at play, forces that had remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike. Zorth approached, his yellow eyes reflecting the cold stars outside. "Captain, I've been analyzing the data from the Time Eater core. There's something troubling I think you should see." Lake stopped and turned to him, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" Zorth handed him a data pad, and Lake's gaze hardened as he reviewed the information. "These are coordinates," Zorth said. "Coordinates that correspond to a region of space we've never explored. It's as though the Time Eaters were preparing to open a new front, a new territory that no one knew existed. But the thing is, they weren't the only ones involved." Lake's heart sank as he continued to read the data. There were signs, small, almost imperceptible anomalies, that suggested other factions were involved, ones far more ancient and far more dangerous than the Time Eaters. And they weren't just manipulating time. They were manipulating something far deeper, something tied to the very fabric of existence itself. "So what's next?" Lake asked, his voice steady, but with an edge of concern. Zorth looked at him, his expression grave. "We need to find out who else is behind this before it's too late. This is bigger than we realized." "The Time Eaters were just the beginning, Captain." Lake's mind raced. There was no time to waste. The galaxy was on the brink, and every moment they spent in uncertainty could cost them dearly. "Set a course for those coordinates, Zorth," Lake ordered. "We're not waiting for the next threat to find us. We're going to find it ourselves." Zorth nodded and quickly moved to the command console. The Indomitable's engines roared to life as the ship prepared to chart a new course into uncharted space. Chapter 18. The Unseen Enemy. The Indomitable entered the coordinates provided by Zorth, and the crew prepared for what lay ahead. The unknown region was vast, its stars dim and distant. The space around them was eerily quiet, as if it had been abandoned for eons. "There's something wrong here," one of the crew members muttered. "It's too quiet," Lake nodded, feeling the same unease. The Time Eaters had left their mark on this part of space, but there was something more sinister lurking in the darkness. As the ship continued deeper into the region, the crew began to notice strange anomalies. Some systems began to malfunction. Strange energy pulses interfered with their sensors, and the very fabric of space seemed to warp around them. It was as if they were being watched. "We're not alone," Lake said, his voice low and tense. "Get ready for anything." Suddenly the ship shuddered as a massive energy wave passed through them, causing the Indomitable to rock violently. The crew scrambled to maintain control as the energy pulse continued to buffet the ship. "This isn't just a storm," Zorth said, looking at the readings. "Someone is actively attacking us, and they're using something far more advanced than anything the Time Eaters had." Lake's heart pounded in his chest. The threat they faced now was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. There was a new force in the galaxy, one that wielded technology beyond their understanding. "Full shields, brace for impact," Lake ordered as the ship rocked again, this time more violently. In the distance, a massive ship emerged from the shadows, its sleek form barely visible against the backdrop of the black void. The ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its hull a dark, metallic surface that seemed to absorb light, its engines humming with an eerie power. "This is it," Zorth said. "We've found them." Lake's gaze hardened as the enemy ship powered up its weapons. There was no time for hesitation. "All hands, prepare for battle," Lake commanded as the Indomitable took evasive maneuvers. The crew scrambled into position, ready for whatever came next. The mysterious new enemy had made its move, and now the Indomitable would have to fight for its survival. Again, Chapter 19, The Final Hour. The Indomitable danced through space, evading blasts from the enemy vessel. The mysterious enemy's weapons were unlike anything the crew had faced before, energy beams that distorted space itself, making it difficult to anticipate their trajectory. The ship's hull groaned under the strain, and the crew fought desperately to keep the ship intact. Lake gripped the command chair, his mind racing with options. They couldn't afford to keep evading forever. They needed a way to fight back. "Zorth, any ideas?" Lake shouted over the comms. Zorth, his face tense and filled with determination, worked furiously at the control console. "We've analyzed their ship's energy signature, Captain. It's like nothing we've ever seen. But I think I found a weakness. There's a power node in the center of their ship. If we can disable it, we can cripple their ability to fire." Lake nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. "Then let's make it happen. Set a course for the power node." The Indomitable pushed forward, its engines screaming as they closed the distance to the enemy ship. But the closer they got, the more intense the fire became. Energy beams raked across their shields, and explosions rocked the ship's structure. "Shields at 30%, Zorth called out, his voice filled with urgency. "We're running out of time." Lake gritted his teeth. "We can do this. Focus fire on that power node. We'll get through this." The crew worked together, coordinating their efforts as the Indomitable maneuvered closer to the heart of the enemy vessel. The ship groaned under the strain, but they were close. So close to the power node that they could feel the heat radiating from it. "Now!" Lake shouted as the ship's weapons fired in unison, a concentrated blast of energy striking the power node. The enemy ship shuddered violently, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, with a tremendous explosion, the power node detonated, sending shockwaves through the ship. The enemy vessel staggered, its weapons sputtering out as its energy systems failed. But the battle wasn't over. The enemy ship was heavily damaged, but it was still alive, and its crew was still fighting. "Get ready for the final push," Lake ordered, as the Indomitable prepared for the final strike. Chapter 20. The End of the Beginning. With one final, coordinated assault, the Indomitable fired everything it had left. The enemy ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its shattered pieces scattering across space. The Indomitable drifted in the aftermath, its systems barely functioning, the crew exhausted but alive. They had faced the unknown and emerged victorious. But at what cost? Lake stood at the bridge window, watching the debris of the enemy ship drift into the void. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. There were more threats out there, more enemies waiting to strike, and the Indomitable would be ready. Zorth stood beside him, his face grim. "Captain, we've won this battle, but we've only scratched the surface of what's out there." Lake nodded, his gaze hardening. "We'll fight whatever comes next. We won't stop until the galaxy is safe." The journey of the Indomitable was far from over. And as long as they had the strength to fight, they would face whatever challenges the future held. Together. Chapter 21. Shadows of the Past. The battle had been won, but it was evident that the Indomitable's crew was far from safe. They had destroyed a powerful enemy, but the galaxy was vast, and there were too many unknowns left. Lake couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow of something far darker loomed ahead. The mysterious force behind the enemy ship, the anomalies in space, the sudden appearance of such an advanced technology, it all pointed to something much more ancient and terrifying. As the Indomitable limped through space toward a nearby star system to make repairs, Lake stood in his quarters, staring at the star map. His mind kept returning to the coordinates they had discovered, the ones that led them into this new, uncharted region of space. Those coordinates were not a coincidence. They were a calling. "What are we missing?" he muttered to himself. He turned as the door slid open behind him. Zorth entered, his expression as stern as ever, though there was a glint of concern in his eyes. "Captain, I've been going over the data again. There's something off about the readings we got from the enemy ship. It wasn't just advanced technology. It was something far older. We've seen hints of this before, but never in such a concentrated form. These readings, they suggest a connection to something we thought was nothing more than myth." Lake raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, myth?" Zorth hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to reveal what he had discovered. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "The Indomitable and its crew have faced many threats, but we've never encountered this before. There are ancient legends, stories of a force older than the galaxy itself. A being, or rather a collective, known as the Nexus." Lake felt a chill run down his spine. "The Nexus? I've heard the name in passing. Ancient texts, cryptic warnings, but I thought it was all superstition." Zorth's gaze hardened, his voice growing more serious. "It's not superstition, Captain. The Nexus is real, and we've just stumbled upon its path. The readings from the enemy ship match those described in the oldest records we have. This entity, or group, has been manipulating civilizations for eons. The Time Eaters were just pawns in their game, and now it seems like they've turned their attention to us." Lake felt a sense of dread settle over him. He had always known that the galaxy held mysteries beyond his understanding. But this This was something else. The very foundation of everything he had known was being questioned. "What do we do now?" Lake asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. Zorth's eyes flashed with a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. "We need to find out more. We need to discover the truth about the Nexus before it's too late." Chapter 22. Into the Abyss. The Indomitable made its way to a nearby space station for repairs, but the crew's focus had already shifted to their next mission. They had little time to waste. Zorth's discovery had set the course for their future, and now they had to follow it. Lake convened a meeting with his senior officers, each of them still recovering from the battle but aware that their journey had only just begun. The stakes were higher than ever before. "We need to be prepared," Lake began, his tone firm. "Zorth's findings have shown us that we are dealing with something beyond anything we've faced. The Nexus is a force that has existed for longer than our civilizations. It's not just a military threat, it's something deeper, something that controls the very essence of time and space." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "Our mission is clear. We need to find the Nexus before they find us. We need to gather all the information we can, and we need to stop them. Whatever it takes." The officers nodded, a mix of determination and unease on their faces. They all knew that the coming battles would be unlike anything they had prepared for. Zorth stepped forward, holding a datapad with new coordinates. "These are the next coordinates we've discovered, Captain. They lead to an ancient temple, one that predates any known civilization. It's on a planet that's been abandoned for millennia, but it's the last known location of something the Nexus sought, a powerful artifact capable of warping the fabric of reality itself. If the Nexus has found it, we'll be facing a threat unlike anything we can imagine." Lake's eyes narrowed as he looked at the map. "Then it's settled. We'll go to this temple. But be ready for anything. The Nexus won't let us simply walk in and take it." Chapter 23. The Ancient Temple. The planet they were heading toward was desolate, its surface cracked and barren, a once thriving world now reduced to dust and ruins. The Indomitable entered its orbit, and Lake stood at the window, gazing at the planet below. There was an eerie silence surrounding it, the calm before the storm. Zorth joined him, his eyes scanning the planet's surface. "There's no life here, Captain. It's been abandoned for thousands of years. But there's something off. I can feel it in the air. Something is waiting for us down there." Lake turned to face him, his expression hardening. "I know, and I'm not sure what it is, but we'll find out soon enough." The crew prepared to land on the planet's surface, and soon the Indomitable descended through the atmosphere, the ancient ruins coming into view. The temple they were searching for lay in the heart of a massive mountain range, an imposing structure that seemed to defy time itself. As the crew disembarked, they made their way through the ruins, stepping cautiously through the darkened hallways of the ancient temple. Strange symbols covered the walls, and the air felt charged with an unnatural energy. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. "This place is ancient," Zorth whispered, his voice tinged with awe. "Older than anything we've encountered, and yet it feels alive." Lake's hand tightened around his weapon, sensing that something was wrong. They had entered the heart of something far beyond their understanding, and every instinct told him to be prepared for the unexpected. They reached the central chamber of the temple, where an altar stood, and on that altar lay a dark crystal pulsing with energy. The artifact they had been searching for. "That's it," Lake said, his voice low. "We need to take it. But be ready for anything." As he stepped forward, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. Shadows seemed to stretch and warp, and an eerie whisper filled the air. The Indomitable's crew took up defensive positions, their weapons drawn. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, its tone cold and otherworldly. "You should not have come here." The crew turned, and from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was a being cloaked in darkness, its form flickering between existence and non-existence. Lake's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure's voice sent a chill down his spine. "I am the guardian of the Nexus, and you are too late. The end has already begun."